Okay, so now we're going to take a look at functions with multiple return values. Now these are going to be functions that have a return value, but rather than just the one, they'll have two. So this is going to be not so different from declaring a function with multiple parameters. We're going to have to include a name and then the type. Now these can be of different types, so we can have, for example, a function that returns both a string and an integer, and that's exactly what we'll be looking at. So there will be multiple return values and different return types as well. Alright, so now let's take a look at functions that have two return values. So we've only seen one up until now, and in a lot of languages you can only return one value, but in Swift 3 it allows you to return multiple values at once, as long as they're separated by a comma. Okay, so what we're going to do to represent this is we're going to create this function that's going to basically print out it's going to take a number as a parameter, it's going to double it, and it's going to print out the string representation and the integer representation. Okay, so whether or not this function is useful is one thing, but I just want to allow this to demonstrate that you can return two variables at once and they can be of different types. Okay, so this is just going to number input and return string and string representation and the number. Okay, so we're going to call this function, what's a fitting name for this? Double and string. Okay, double and toString, how about that? Okay, and as the input parameters, it's just going to take in a number, and it's going to be of type int. Okay, and for our return type now, instead of just saying either a string or an integer, we have to open up these brackets, and that's because we have multiple types. Now, if we have multiple return types, we need to give our return types a name so that the return function knows exactly what it should be looking for. Okay, so the first one we're just going to call, the first one's going to be the doubled number, so we're going to call this doubled int, and this one is going to be of type int, and the second one is going to be string int, and this is going to be of type string. Okay, and then our brackets open and close there. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's see what's going on here first. Okay, so this function called double and toString, again, it's going to take in this number, this integer, going to assign the constant number to contain it, and it's going to first double this number and return the doubled integer, and then it's going to convert it to a string and return the string representation of it. Okay, and the way we can do that is we want to first create this constant, and this is going to be doubled, and we're going to say this is equal to number times 2. Okay, so this is going to be our double number, and this is what we're going to return, and I know this is just a warning saying that we haven't used it yet. See, it was never used, but that's okay. We don't need to worry about that because we're about to use it. And then what we can do is we can just say return. We can even create another variable if we want, so we can create this string called doubled toString, and we can say this is equal to the string representation of doubled. Okay, so again, there's this warning here, that's fine. So again, remember, if we want to convert between types, we can just do string. If we want to convert to a string, we just call string, and then whatever's in these brackets here will be converted to a string. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to actually return something now. So this is going to be return, and then in brackets this time, because we have two things to return, we're going to, in the order that we said that we would return them in, so we're going to return the doubled number first and then the string. We're going to do doubled and then doubled toString. Okay. Alright, so let's take a look at what's happening. Before we run this, before we call it and run it, we have taken in an integer, called it number, and we know we're going to return an integer, and we're going to return a string. Okay, so we doubled the number that we took in, so double this input parameter and stored it in this constant called doubled, and then we took this constant doubled, converted it to a string, and stored it in this constant doubled to string. And then we just return the two in the order that we said we would. So we said first we'll return the int and then the string, and that's what we're doing here. We're first returning the doubled integer and then the doubled number as a string. Okay, so what we can do is we can now print these out. So we can print out double and toString, and then let's just pass it a number. Let's just pass it 50. And let's see what kind of results we get once this starts running. And it's going to keep running, and there we go. So we get 100 as the doubled integer and then 100 as the string. So this is doing exactly what we want it to do. Okay, and so yeah, so this is how you can return multiple, you can have multiple return values and even multiple return types in the same function. Now this one wasn't particularly useful, but there are going to be instances where you'll need to return multiple values, and they could be of multiple return types as well. Okay, so in this case I just called the double and toString function and I passed it 50, and I put it inside of this print call, and it basically just performed all these functions. It took in 50 as the number, and then it doubled 50, stored it in doubled, and then converted that to a string. And so then we had 100 here, and we had the string representation of 100 here. Okay, so that's how you can return multiple parameters. And also one other thing to note, I talked about it briefly, but this is just a function that has a function as a parameter, and that's fine to do. I'm not going to create a tutorial on it because we've kind of already seen it in action here. So any function that you create, or any of the built-in functions, they could take in a function as a parameter as long as it has a return type. Okay, so in this case we have a couple of return types, a couple of things to print, so it's fine to include it in this print function. Okay, so be wary that you can't do this all the time. The print function, however, kind of just prints whatever you put into it, so it's fine to do. Alright, so that is, again, how to design a function with a couple of different return values. Alright, so just make sure that you are giving each of your return value, if there are multiple return values, you need to give each of these return values a name and a type, and also make sure you're returning them in the order that you declared that you would return them as well. Okay, so the next part will be dealing with functions with conditionals in them. So this part of the tutorial focused on functions with multiple return values. So up until this point we'd only seen functions with either no return values or one return value. This time we looked at two. So we had two different return types as well as two different return values as well. So our function basically just doubled a number that we took it as an input parameter, and it returned both the doubled number as an integer and the string representation of that number. So in that way we demonstrated that we can have two different return values as well as two different return types. Okay, and we also talked a little bit about functions that can take in functions as parameters. And the example we used was the print function, which we'd seen a few times previously. So this basically is a function that can take in a function as a parameter as long as the function passed as a parameter has a return type. Because, for example, our function returned an integer and a string, so the print function, although we actually added a call to a function inside, it's just interpreting that as the return value of that function, which in our case was an integer and a string, and the print function is fine to be printing out both of those.